It's my pleasure to interview Dr. Jessica Headley today. So, Dr. Headley is a licensed professional counselor and the co-founder of Wellness Grove. Dr. Headley earned a dual bachelor's degree in psychology and sociology and a master's degree in community counseling and a doctoral degree in counselor education and supervision, all from the University of Akron. She also holds a graduate certificate in gerontology and has completed specialized coursework in women's studies. So before founding her private practice, Dr. Headley gained experience working with diverse clients across hospital, college, and community mental health settings. Her practice, Wellness Grove, provides individual, couples, and family counseling sessions, both in person as well as virtually. They also offer a variety of mental health and wellness programs to businesses, organizations, and fellow mental health providers. And one of the things that stands out to me when learning more about Wellness Grove is the way that they accept over 50 different types of insurance, which helps ensure that mental health services are financially accessible for a wide range of clients. They also have a growing internship program that is very awesome, that is designed to prepare interns for practice as licensed professional counselors and social workers. So Dr. Headley and her co-founder, Sean Swiger, employ a team of over 70 licensed professional counselors, social workers, and marriage and family therapists. So all different types of degrees and training backgrounds. So my first question for you today, Dr. Headley, is can you just tell us a little bit about your educational background and what led you to pursue this career in counseling?
I would love to. And thank you so much for the introduction. It was beautiful. I started my interest in counseling in middle school. So there is a diary somewhere in my collectibles that says I wanted to be a psychologist from a very young age. And I actually never faltered on that path. When I was in high school, I had desired to work in the VA system and work with veterans because my dad is a disabled veteran. And so that was the path that I thought I was going to lead. So I went to school and I loved my sociology classes. So I was a psych major. And so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to do both. So I did both tracks of courses. And I honestly think that the profession of counseling is a beautiful blend of psychology and sociology together because we're really looking at structures and we're looking at making a big social impact. It's more holistic in nature. And so that coursework just naturally lended itself for me pursuing a degree in community counseling at the master's level. And during my experience in my master's program, I just had incredible mentorship from women leaders in the profession. And they encouraged me to pursue a doctorate degree. Had I not had that encouragement, I probably would not be here today. And my dissertation topic, which focuses on women's leadership development, probably would not have been written. So I really kind of give a lot of gratitude to like all my mentors along the way, because there are so many opportunities where I probably would have stopped my education, but someone lifted me up and encouraged me to continue to pursue more. And so when I was in my master's program, the reason I didn't end up being in a VA hospital was at the time, counselors did not accept TRICARE, which is a major carrier for veterans. And so I had to kind of look elsewhere, and I ended up going into a non-VA hospital system. And then kind of through my educational experiences, I just found a love for research and teaching. And so I started a new path of moving into higher education, which then, as you find, shifts again. And then I ended up in the practice world. So there's a lot of pivoting and a lot of different areas in which I love to be a part of. And I think that's kind of what makes earning a doctoral degree so special is that you can, I call it the pizza pie. You can have half your pizza pie be pepperoni and half be cheese, and you can do clinical and academic work, or you can say, let me throw some olives on there and let me do some research or some supervision, or let me do some nonprofit work. And you can always take ingredients off the pizza pie, or you can add them on and you can change it up at any time. So that's kind of something, you know, when I talk to people about a doctoral degree, is it doesn't mean that you can't get to the same place without a doctoral degree, but the doctoral degree just naturally opens up some doors.
Mm-hmm. Do you find being in private practice, is there any of those skills that you learned from academia or that you gain from that doctoral degree that you are able to carry forward into your current practice?
I think probably the biggest skill would simply be grit. I think in a doctoral program, you learn to take on many things. And there's that saying of it's fine, I'm fine, everything is fine. And you're on fire and there's all these things. I call them dumpster fires. So in a doctoral program, you're doing research, you're doing coursework, you're doing clinical work, you're really pushing and extending yourself to a point where you may not think, oh, I can manage all of these things. And you learn the skills to do that. You learn the skills to say, while everything is on fire, I have to put out this fire first. And it's okay to let these other things be on fire. And I think, to be honest, grit is probably the biggest skill that you can take from a doctoral program and say, yes, let's transfer this to owning a business, because there's so many things that go wrong and there's so many growing edges that go along with owning a business that you have to have grit and be able to kind of put your head down and say, I'm just going to work really hard and I'm going to work through this, not against it.
Can you tell us, so you were previously an assistant professor. So can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to move to a private practice and to start Wellness Grove?
So right before I started Wellness Grove, as you mentioned, I was a tenure track professor. And at the time, COVID happened. And so one of the things that we started to see a shift in the professional world of clinical care was we started to see the introduction of telehealth, and we started to see a high influx of care because the need started to rise rapidly. And so one of the things professionally that I saw was we have really high caseloads. We're starting to get clinicians with burnout. The landscape is changing because more and more people want telehealth. Community agencies are busting at the seams. And so it was kind of a wonderful opportunity to kind of step in with the training that I have, both educationally and clinically, and say, I want to make an impact. I want to make a difference. And not only do I want to provide really good care for clients, but I want to create a setting for clinicians. And I think sometimes, a lot of times, organizations or institutions will talk about the importance of client care. We provide a high level of care. We provide excellent clinical services. But what they forget to talk about is how the culture and how the structure also supports the clinicians. Because at the end of the day, if clinicians are not well, we're not going to give good services. And so for me, my philosophy is that both client care and clinician care are both front burners of a stove. Clinician care is not a back burner, and it shouldn't be secondary. We have to look at them equally. Otherwise, we're failing our clients and our system remains broken.
So would you say that's one of the big things that separates Wellness Grove from other private practices that have a number of clinicians working together?
Absolutely. There are so many structural things that we do that are just a little bit different to maximize wellness for clinicians, and wellness is in our name. And so we really speak to, okay, well, how do we integrate wellness in your schedule? How do we integrate wellness in supervision? How do we integrate wellness in your day-to-day experiences? What does that look like? And wellness for us is part of onboarding. It's part of training. It's part of ongoing discussions. We do burnout prevention at our practice because most people approach burnout as the clinician is not doing enough. You really need to engage in more self-care activities. You need to go to therapy maybe if you're feeling stressed or burnout. And so all the responsibilities are pushed on the clinician. But when the environment is not supportive, when the environment is toxic, or when the environment has too high of productivity standards that are very difficult to meet, there is no amount of self-care that is going to bring an individual clinician out of burnout. It has to be a change within the organization. So part of Wellness Grove's mission and part of how we operate is really looking at, yes, we want to encourage self-care, but we also want to look in how we operate structurally to address burnout, but then also how do we operate to prevent it?
So that just reminds me of your dual major in psych and sociology. That's more of your sociology background coming in there. That's very lovely.
Absolutely. Like, you get to look at things different.
So in terms of education, you told us about your educational journey. What kind of education is typically needed for the role that you have as a private practice owner?
So as a private practice owner, you can own a practice if you're a licensed professional counselor in any state with a master's degree. Most private practices are owned and operated by someone who's independently licensed, so they don't need supervision. However, you do see a trend now of master's level clinicians opening private practice and they have an outside supervisor. So they may list this individual's name on their website and say, while I'm the practice owner, I receive supervision from so-and-so, and they'll provide that information. Most established or notable practices are run by clinicians who are not only independently licensed, but are seasoned in some respect. So normally you'll see maybe 5 years of experience, and you may see some other credentials or designations along with their standard licensure. So you might see that they're a supervisor, or they specialize in some type of care, like maybe they're EMDR trained, or they have certification perinatal mental health care, something like that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the things that happen behind the scenes owning a private practice that people might not be aware of, but if they're considering this as like a potential career path for them, that they should be aware of?
In terms of like owning and kind of being like a solo private practice?
Yes, anything that you think you wish you would have known before.
I would say the biggest thing that I hear from any colleague or maybe any like solo private practice person is the administrative tasks. They're always underestimated. So billing, calling clients. If a client doesn't come, you need to call them back. And even checking the mail, checking accounts, processing taxes, all of those administrative things. A lot of people underestimate the amount of time that goes into that. If you're starting off, which most people do is, I call them shingle practices, is like, I'm hanging my shingle and it's just me. You're responsible for all of that. And on top of the administrative tasks, you have operational tasks. And so you're going to be taking out the garbage. You're going to be cleaning the facility. When something breaks, you've got to replace it. If there are pests, you have to get pest control to come and take care of that. And so there's a lot of extra work that goes into operating a practice that you're not necessarily getting paid for, right? You're getting paid for your billable session, but not for all of the administrative work. And so that's definitely something to consider when opening a practice. I would say the other thing is the importance of technology and being technologically savvy, because nowadays, most of the time marketing is done through Google. And so if you don't have good marketing skills or you can't outsource that, it's likely that you're not going to show up at the top of a Google search and people may not find you right away. Of course, word of mouth is so important, and it can get you really far. But if you're just opening a practice and you don't have good marketing in place, it's going to be a very slow growth, even in the midst of a crisis, because while we have a high need for mental health services, most people now are finding their services online. And so if you're not online and if you're not proactive about marketing, people just aren't going to naturally find you, or they're going to lean toward an easily accessible service. And so that's something that, should be considered. And I would say probably finances would be the last thing, about being relatively flexible with your costs. Everyone should look at the industry standards of what that cost is going to be and what the cost for your service should be based on your experience and your licensure. And so when you have really high costs, you're going to have high billable sessions, but it may not be accessible to the majority of people. If you have a majority of people come and you have a high no-show rate, it might have been more beneficial to keep your costs high with clients who would have been more loyal and attending more frequently. And so there definitely is some balancing acts that you really need to take a look at to determine what's going to be like a good price for me, and financially, how am I going to set those rates and how am I going to survive, right? And so knowing that when you open a private practice, traditionally, you're in the red when you open. And so you're going to be in the red for months and not make an income, but that over time, that income is going to build and it has the potential to grow.
One of the things that I just know from our past conversations is how much difficulty and how much work and time intensive it was for you to get paneled, to be able to accept different types of insurance. could you, I know that it's such a big can of worms, but maybe just talk a little bit about whether people should consider that or why you considered and got paneled at so many different companies?
Yeah. So with paneling, that's really a choice based on the practitioner. And so a clinician can choose to not get paneled. If they chose that one route, then the services would be self-pay. So you might say, I charge $125 an hour, and you need to pay in advance before your service. And if you have a late cancellation or show the appointment, there may be a charge associated with those behaviors. On the other side, you can choose to get paneled. Now, getting paneled means an insurance is listing you and that a client would come to your sessions and they may have a copay. Now, with Medicare and Medicaid programs, there is no copay for clients. Those services are free, but with commercial insurances like Anthem or Medical Mutual, there's going to be a copay depending on the client's deductible at the time of their service. So they might have met their deductible for the year and they may not have a copay anymore, or their copay could be around $20. And so the client will pay the copay and then you will send out your bill to the insurance company and you will get reimbursed. If your services are, say, $125, and insurance may not reimburse you $125. They're going to have a negotiated rate with you. So it may be, let's take insurance A, for example, that insurance A says, well, for a follow-up session, we only reimburse $80. So that would be your amount of money received for the service that you provided. Some practices find loopholes with this and they may say, well, if the insurance doesn't cover the whole cost, then you need to cover the remainder of the balance in addition to your copay. You always have to balance your decisions with whether or not your care is going to be accessible. Some private practices may only choose 5 commercial insurances that have really high reimbursement rates so that when they see their clients, they know they're getting a higher billable rate. Some practices like Wellness Growth, we want to make sure that care is accessible to everyone. And so we don't consider that. We just accept everyone. And so to counterbalance the fact that we might get lower reimbursement rates, we really try our best to ensure that clients have access to care and that we're filling schedules. And so we may reach out to clients and say, hey, you don't have anything scheduled. Would you like to schedule? We do a lot of outreach and the quality of our care is higher. So we have lower cancellation rates, which kind of makes up the difference. So it's not an easy question to answer. Definitely those would be the things that you would consider, but there's so many factors that go into the mix on why one approach might be more successful for a particular person than another.
Mm-hmm. So you've already touched a little bit about this, but can you tell us a little bit, how did you manage all of this, like the marketing and the business and the financial and even like the human resource aspect, because you're hiring and training and doing all of that. How have you been able to balance and learn how to do all of those types of tasks?
Mm-hmm. So some of those tasks come naturally with training. And I would say there's 2 things. One is finding good leaders and being a good leader. So making sure that before you open a practice that you have a baseline skill level in all of the areas in which you need to operate, right? It doesn't mean that to manage finances, you have to have an accounting background, but you may want to ensure that you manage your own personal finances well and that you have maybe accounting systems, like even if you're checking your bank statements or you have a good relationship with an accountant, for example. So baseline, you kind of want to look at all the areas of your business and say, do I have even the smallest of skill set across these areas? And am I willing and am I motivated to learn? And am I motivated to stretch myself? If you say, I just do not like finances, I do not want to do this ever, you're going to run into some hurdles opening a private practice unless you want to outsource that responsibility, which leads me to the second success part of the recipe, which is finances. And so if you're a shingle practice and you kind of put your shingle up and you say, I want to open, you may not have readily available financial support to outsource things. because you're starting your practice. And so you might say, once I get income and get settled, then I'll kind of expand one role at a time. That's going to be a really slow process. So you're likely looking at a private practice that over time, you might get super excited to have 5 people by the end of the year. Wellness Grove was designed not as a shingle practice, but as a business. And so we really took a corporate model and said, how can we do rapid expansion? And with that comes a massive financial investment. I shall not disclose how much money we have to take out to open our practices, but many of you might keel over. And so really saying, I believe in this, I'm going to financially invest in this. And because I've hired all of these people like HR, like senior billers, like people who can check on benefits and support credentialing processes, while I invested a lot at the beginning, my return is going to come faster and it's going to be a much larger return than if I would have hung a shingle practice. And so one is good people, right? Including yourself and being an eager learner. But then the second thing is a financial investment. If you're not looking to have this big enterprise, right? You don't need as big of as a financial investment. But if your goal is to say, I really want to be kind of like a corporation that continues to expand, then you have to realize that corporations spend a lot of money and energy into hiring the right people and spending money to do that.
Mm-hmm. So when you're going through this process of looking, because you've expanded, you have over 70 people. And so I want to talk a little bit about staff and salaries and how you go about that. So what qualifications are you looking for, first of all, when you're hiring? So when you're hiring counselors, social workers, psychologists, or therapists?
Mm-hmm. So outside of the internship program, we're always looking for a licensed professional that has either a master's degree or a doctoral degree. So that terminal degree is really important for us, and they have to hold an active licensure. We're also making sure that that person has the skills to be successful in private practice. So private practice is every private practice is built a little different, but it's more autonomous. And so I like to have people who have really good rapport skills. They can establish relationships really fast, and they have a good ethical mind. So normally I'll ask, like, have you ever experienced an ethical dilemma? What was the dilemma? How did you respond? What's the outcome? If they say, oh, I've never had an ethical dilemma, they probably had many ethical dilemmas that they didn't pick up on. So I'm really looking for qualities of someone who's kind of an independent thinker, and they don't necessarily need to know all the answers, but they've got to be able to reach out. And so that's kind of like the educational and like the personal qualities that I would be looking for. But one of the things that I remind people of is that no matter what your degree, what your licensure, what your training or specialty area is, the most significant predictor of clients' change process and them having successful outcomes and treatment is the relationship. So if you're not good at having relationships and building rapport, you're not going to be successful in private practice.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter if you're a social worker, psychologist, like clinical counselor, or marriage and family therapist.
Nope, doesn't matter. It only matters to you because those particular professions have different pillars and values, and they may align more. And the more that you are aligned with your work, the more authentic and congruent you can be. And the more authentic and congruent you are, the more clients can pick up on that, right? And so they want to be with someone who's natural and who they can relate to and seems to be honest and vulnerable, right? That they can connect with. So that's the most important thing.
Can you talk a little bit about realistic salary? So what would be a realistic salary range for private practice owners compared to the counselors and therapists who work for them?
Okay, so I'll start with the therapists themselves. So the wonderful thing about counselors is that we specialize in career development. So I looked this up before the meeting. ONET, which is our largest database that gives career information based on the labor statistics, says that on average, a mental health counselor in the United States will make about $26 an hour, or the equivalent of around $53,000 per year. In Ohio, where I'm from, we're actually lower than the national average. Our clinicians make on average $50,000 a year. So in private practice, in Ohio, our private practice, the lowest pay rate for a very beginner clinician with little experience who just graduated would be $35 an hour. So if we did $35 an hour by 50 weeks a year, so we took a 2-week vacation, and we considered a 20% cancellation rate, they would make about $56,000. So $3,000 higher than the national average. If a person had no cancellation rate at all and made the lowest, they'd make around $70,000. So the difference between 56 and 70 is pretty vast. In private practice, that comes down to impression management. And so if you're really good, you're going to have a higher pay scale. If you're not so good with rapport, you're going to be looking at a lower pay range. And in private practice, that is really all up to your personality and your relatability. And another important factor is your perceived competence. So while you may be nice and warm, if a client doesn't perceive you as competent, you're likely not going to have ongoing sessions with them. And so realistically, kind of at the base, you're looking at, I would say like 55 to like 65 would be an appropriate range. Now, as a private practice owner, again, you're going to be in the red. If you're investing in your practice, if you hold a shingle, you do all the administrative work, right? You might make more. But your salary, you have to include all the administrative time that you're spending. So if you really included that in the mix, you probably would be making minimum wage. So really, you're not going to see a big salary output for years. A lot of times, private practice owners still have a caseload. So while they may extend their practices and hire or work alongside other clinicians, maybe renting out office space, for example, that return doesn't happen so fast. And so a lot of times a private practice owner might be benefiting from expanding the team, but they're still seeing their own clients. I would say it would be reasonable to say that within, I would say, a year to 3 years, that the salary could reasonably bump to like $70,000 to $100,000. And if you have a growing practice, maybe that's larger, or that your rates are higher. Again, this is going to be dependent on your billable rates and the specialty services that you provide. I can definitely see anywhere from 100 to 200,000. If you have a very large practice, it is reasonable to assume that you can make anywhere from 200,000 to $500,000 a year.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you tell us, I'm going to switch topics just a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you've faced as a private practice owner and how you may have overcome them?
Mm-hmm. Some of the challenges are just the most silly of things. When we first opened, we didn't realize this until it was brought to our attention that I want to say it was like a specific phone company. It might have been like Verizon, that whatever number we got assigned to our practice through AT&T, Verizon callers can get through. And we didn't know that for a while. And so what happened is we had all these people calling and it would go, do, you've reached the wrong number, or like this number doesn't exist. So while that was something that may be, oh, that's easy to fix, it wasn't. It took almost 4 weeks to fix this issue. And for that 4-week period of time, we were not able to provide services or connect with potential clients that would have wanted services from us. And so sometimes there are these things like we've had power outages that shuts down your practice, right? And so I would say happenstance events that are outside of your control that you have to navigate through. Like one big national thing that happened this year was with Change Healthcare. Change Healthcare is the largest entity that processes billing claims and they had a cyber threat this year, which shut down their operations for over a month, which meant anyone who used Change Healthcare to process their claims, which we did, was at a pure halt, and our claims could not be processed. And while there were alternative paths, it meant using another entity or redesigning the whole entire structure of your practice. And so what happened is mass chaos among anyone who was using Change Healthcare. And so, it was going to the bank and saying, is there a line of credit? Reorganizing the structure of your company, keeping your fingers crossed that things were going to be reset, and we're still digging out of that, and it's June. And so there are definitely those happenstance things. And then these expenses, I talk about finances, but that's the reality of the world. We just replaced printer ink, and replacing printer ink was $5,000. And you wouldn't think, oh, it's just printer ink, right? Even your reaction, it's just printer ink, but $5,000 to replace printer ink. So you have these expenses that you're not necessarily anticipating until they come. And then right? Then okay, well, when I need to replace printer ink, maybe once a year, that's going to be this cost, right? And so you also have to look at inflation, and you have to look at the changing landscape of the profession. And so we have to evaluate based on inflation and rising costs of things. Do we increase our services, the cost for our services? If we do, we're going to lose a lot of clients, right? If we don't, how are we going to afford to pay clinicians more? How can we make sure that their salaries are commensurate with increasing costs and costs of living, right? And so you have hard decisions at times as well. That involve people you care about, right? And so I would say like some of the relational pieces of like when you maybe co-own a practice with a colleague that you're not always going to agree. What happens to your relationship, and how do you overcome those disconnections? Or if someone's been really loyal and they help you build your company from the ground up, but they're not performing very well, are you going to let them go? What if their improvement, like what if the things that they're struggling with don't improve, right? And so there are hard decisions that are emotional. And so sometimes you find yourself in the business mind of like, this is the right decision for the business, but the personal mind, like this doesn't align with my values, or this doesn't feel good with me. And I would say those things happen when you have a large company like we do, at least a dozen times a day. And so there is kind of a self-compassion that you need to have for yourself and for the process. You have to be kind to yourself, and you have to know that this is part of the day, this is part of the process. And if you didn't have struggles, or if people didn't voice concerns or critical feedback, you probably aren't running a good company.
Let's talk about a more positive frame. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the rewards of owning and operating Wellness Grove?
Yeah, beyond like ink. Okay.
Yes.
So there's so many. I'll like share an example. I'll probably tear up, but I think this is like the epitome of everything. So, we had a program, and I got to meet a client at one of the programs that we had. And I was talking to this client, and this client has multiple foster children. And the client shared with me, yeah, I come to counseling at Wellness Grove, and so do every single one of my children. And she knew the counselors' names for each of her children. And we have 2 locations, and she knew the support staff at each location by name. And she just talked so highly of her experiences. And she had shared that each clinician that was matched with each of her children was just like the perfect fit for that child. And that the support had really facilitated that. And that it was just such a warm welcome. And it was such an easy, streamlined process to like schedule and get like all of her children into the practice. And so it's kind of moments like that when you get to see quality care in action, and you get to see the amazing work that the clinicians do at just the most micro level, right? And so someone really saying, this is a really good service. And now I'm crying. Yeah, but it's like the tearjerker moments, right? That's the best thing. I think it's also wonderful to create opportunities for leadership, for people to move up pipelines. to have advancement with supervision, to have advancement with leadership, and a sense of community. The opportunities, and then just honestly working with clinicians that love what they do, right? I mean, honestly, there's nothing better than working with a whole bunch of people who have a like-minded view on things that love what they do, right? You get to surround yourself with that. And so I just think that the grassroots and everything about clinical mental health and the impact that we can make, it's contagious. And we get excited to extend services or reach out into the community. And to me, like one of the important things that I think about as a private practice owner is, what is my legacy? Like, what do I get to leave behind? What kind of impact do I get to make? And when you're a clinician, you're going to touch at the end of your career, thousands of lives. As a private practice owner who, even with the smallest of teams, you have a potential to touch millions of lives. And so the impact is greater, and you get to have a direct impact on the clinicians and like the leaders in the professions that you work alongside. And so really kind of saying, not only have I had this legacy, but now I've helped someone else achieve a legacy of their own. And then that person is going to be part of the ripple effect where then they mentor and they help someone else achieve a legacy. And so it's just honestly like the most beautiful thing to see.
Okay, so I only have a couple more questions left, but I would like to see, are there any misperceptions or myths about owning a private practice in the counseling field that you would like to address for us, or any that you've heard that have not been your reality?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is that, and I would say this was true maybe 10 or 15 years ago, but the landscape has changed, is that private practice is only for very seasoned people. Now, being a private practice owner, my bias would be that you would be seasoned because you're owning and operating it by yourself. But joining a private practice, being part of a private practice, is now open to individuals across lots of different professions, across all different levels of licensure. And so I would say 15 years ago, be very uncommon for interns to work at a private practice, very uncommon. But nowadays, private practices have morphed. And so it used to be all private practices for the most part were 1099, so like independent contract work. Now private practices are offering W-2 positions. Some private practices are offering insurance. Our private practice offers full back office support. And so you don't have to do any of the billing, co-pays, scheduling, things like that. And so everyone offers something a little different. It's not so, I would say, closed. It's like a very open market with a lot of creativity. And so a lot of people operate their practices in so many different ways. I think private practice is kind of like a catchphrase that we use, but truly each of us is very different. Like a good example would be Wellness Grove is a private practice in the sense that everyone's an independent contractor who's a clinician, but we're like a community health agency because we take a whole bunch of insurances and we're open to everyone. But then we're also like a teaching hospital where we really value education and training and we're trying to build everyone up. But then we're like a master's program because we have an internship program, right? And so we really value that clinical supervision and experiences and making sure that people can developmentally move across levels of licensure and feel supported. And so we're kind of like a hybrid in that sense, right? But we call ourselves a private practice.
So I teach a lot of undergraduates in psychology, and I always get every semester, many of them saying in our psychology as a profession course that they want to be a private practice owner and to go into private practice. In counseling or therapy, the pathways always vary. What advice would you give to students who are currently in their undergrad career and thinking about that as a career path for themselves?
Mhm. I think that early on, it is really important to get quality clinical experiences before you open a practice. And I think an individual has to really think about what kind of private practice do I want to own, right? So if I want to own a private practice, I want to be a generalist. I'm going to see lots of different issues. I really want to get good experience. So I'm prepared to see a lot of issues, right? So I might go into community mental health first so that I'm getting an array of client presentations and I get to work with diverse individuals across the lifespan. If my vision was, I want to open a private practice and I want to specialize in perinatal mental health. Okay, so like pregnancy related issues, then you know what? I'm really going to want to make sure that during my undergraduate and my master's training that I'm getting experience working with pregnancy related issues. I might do some volunteering with some nonprofits. I might see if I can work at an OBGYN or get volunteer experiences so that I can kind of see the entire landscape that a client would experience, right? And so I always say, think of your Disney World and then work backward. So if your Disney World is this, right? Maybe I want to open a private practice and I want to focus on EMDR services and trauma. I want to work backward. I have to get certified in trauma and EMDR, right? I want to work backward. I need to have a supervisor that specializes in trauma so that I get really good feedback. I need to work backward. I need to be at a place that provides trauma services and that they're trauma informed. And so you really want to think, what's my Disney World? And then kind of work backward and move through your stepping stones. It can be really helpful to work at a private practice before you own a private practice. It can also be really helpful to network with professionals in the field who own private practice and ask the questions that you're asking me right now. Because there is a lot of wonderful things, but there's also challenges. And when you close or you go on vacation or you don't feel like going in that day and you want a wellness day, there is no one else to cover you when you're the owner, right? And so you kind of have to know that there is a lot of responsibility that falls on your shoulders, but it's a wonderful responsibility to have.
So this is our last question. What do you think are the emerging trends in counseling that future professionals should be aware of?
That is a great question. I would say that there are 4 trends. So one trend would be rapid population aging. So we are seeing an influx of older adults seeking services. And in the past year, there has been a federal law that now Medicare needs to reimburse professional counselors, which has increased the access of older adults to counselors. And we're seeing an increase right now. So just in the last few weeks, I can think of 3 examples of clinicians that reached out, and one clinician has a 90-year-old client, another one has a 92-year-old, and we have a 97-year-old. And so we are starting to see 90-year-old clients come in for services. And truth be told, our clinicians kind of say, well, I'm not really quite sure what to do with a 90-year-old because it's not the traditional caseload that we would have. And so I think it's really important that people get trained in working with older adults because we're starting to see that trend now, and it is only going to grow. So that's my first trend. My second trend would be the integration of technology and telehealth, that it is incredibly important to get telehealth training and to be abreast of all the technology advancements, especially if you want to be a private practice owner, then you really have to be savvy with search engine optimization on your website or Google marketing campaigns. You want to be like, how do I do that, right? You also want to have technology as part of the services that you provide, whether that's telehealth on the phone, telehealth on video or Zoom. So getting that training, getting certified in telehealth services and learning how to integrate technology into clinical practice is going to be vital. Another trend that I see is specialized care. And so with specialized care, I have noticed more and more that clients will call and maybe they're struggling with OCD. They want a provider that specializes in OCD, not a generalist, not just someone who's open and has availability, but someone who has specialty education and experience. And so really figuring out along the way, no pressure, what your specialty areas are, and saying, okay, if I want to add substance use to my area of specialty, I need to make sure that I know the prominent models of substance use and how to assess and diagnose and treat accordingly based on evidence-based practices. And so really kind of honing in, and you can have many areas of specialty practice, I do, but keeping up with those, making sure that you have continuing education in those, because again, while rapport is very, very important, so is perceived competence. And so you want to appear and you want to be competent for good client care. So definitely specialized care. And then the last area I would say is crisis. And so one of the things that we've noticed with COVID is that we are seeing increased rates of suicidal ideation among Americans. And so we're also seeing really, really high rates of self-injury, especially among adolescents. And so making sure that you have the knowledge and skills and protocols to address safety issues, and that you know appropriate interventions to support individuals. I would say one of the trends that I'm seeing, for example, with suicide, may not be that a lot of individuals are experiencing active suicidal ideation, which might be, I want to kill myself. Here's how. But they're experiencing passive suicidal ideation, which is like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be here. And so really understanding the difference between those experiences, but the interventions may not change, right? But kind of understanding the state and the experiences of our clients and how to best support them.
So just a follow-up, and this relates to a couple of the trends, particularly the specialization and the crisis management. How do you recommend that students get that training, and how do you continue that training and continue building that knowledge base?
So the training can start in undergrad. So if a person's really interested and they say, I know I want to be a clinician, there are undergraduate courses that you can take. I know you'd mentioned in the introduction, and you hold a gerontology background too, is sometimes there are courses at the undergraduate level, working with older adults or crisis response, trauma, those kinds of things. Those aren't available at the undergraduate level. They'll surely be waiting for you at the graduate level, and you'll pick the ones that you want to do, right? So if you don't think that children are your jam, you're not going to take the counseling children course if it's an elective, right? You're going to take something else. And so that's the beautiful thing about being in a master's program, is you have some opportunities to take electives, and you might take electives outside of your own department. So I know when I was pursuing my master's, I took a class through the education department on it was on individuals experiencing poverty. I took a class on poverty because I really wanted to learn about poverty, and I wanted to learn from like a clinician's lens, what I could do to support individuals who experience that. And so sometimes it's taking things outside of your traditional coursework, maybe going to other departments, definitely volunteering. I had a mission when I was in my undergraduate and graduate training that I would volunteer at a new place every year to get experience in lots of different realms, right? And so really tailoring your volunteer opportunities. Don't try to think that volunteering means you have to be there every week for 10 hours. Sometimes there's really great opportunities that are just a few hours at a time that are pretty reasonable. And then I would also say, finding people in the profession that do exactly what you want to do and networking with them and asking them to be your mentor, because most of the time we're so humbled to be even asked. And we absolutely love to share our wisdom and to share our love about the profession, that those are really great opportunities to not only have a great relationship, but to really learn some things that might come up on your pathway, whether they be opportunities or ways to address challenges.
Thank you so much for that advice. And thank you so much for all of your love, for taking the time to answer all of these questions and going through this with us. We really appreciate it. And all the future students who will watch this appreciate it.
Well, I'm so glad to be part of this, and feel free to share my contact information. People are always welcome to reach out, and I'm always excited to talk about counseling and therapy and serving clients. So if there's any follow-up questions, send them my way. And thank you so much for having me.